Hi, how's it going? This is Resident of Collinwood for YouTube. I am here to continue my read along for the Dark Shadows Daybook Unbound, written by Patrick McCrae. I'm still on chapter 2, by the way. Episode 245. When Woodard needs a condemning sample, will Barnabas put the squeeze on reluctant Willie? Dave Woodard, Robert Granger. Barnabas guilts Willie into giving a sample of his blood to Dave Woodard. Having stolen and swapped a clean sample sometime earlier, he eventually reveals this to Willie and warns him that he will not always be so protective. Woodard speaks with Burke and Vicky about the unholy goings on in Maggie's blood. Joe Caldwell had to be stopped. Dave Woodard had to be killed off. Daytime TV could have survived neither. With all due respect to St. Sam and St. Gordon, this is the best written episode of the series, and any more of it and the show would have collapsed under its own eloquence. Sam Hall and Gordon Russell had a series to write. Caldwell crafted a masterpiece, and that's an accomplishment so situationally dependent it would have it would be rare to see one again. Based on the plot alone, it is a tight and intense story of anti-heroics and suspense, where you respect Barnabas's real poetic skullduggery while simultaneously admiring the incredible courtesy of Woodard. I don't know what he saw in the microscope except for pure anti-life and the beginning and the end of the world. Beyond that, the episode works because of its relentless and dark poetry. Most outstanding is the mind game that Barnabas plays and plays and plays with Willie. Ultimately, after an understandable background in the betrayal department, Barnabas is going to test and punish and test Willie until he's satisfied with the results. And then he's going to do it some more. Back in the good old days, you'd just send Riggs out back to horsewhip Ben Stokes like banging a jar lid on the counter to loosen it. But you can't do that now because progress and because the cops are after you, so you don't need an extra attention. Why? Because you got your house back and because you may get your fiance back. And because along with it, some people are going to make their exits a little prematurely. Sorry, yes, it's a shame. It's not like he doesn't jump at the chance for a cure between here and there. It would be nice if Willie just, put the seat down occasionally and stopped with the betrayal business. He is letting off some much needed steam here. And if he lets Willie dangle in uncertainty, it's probably a fraction of the paranoia Barnabas suffers as he lies trapped in a wooden shell from the lethal rays of the sun, while humans do Diablos knows what in full view of the kids. I'm amazed that Roger is Eliki. The real star of the episode is Robert Geringer as Dave Woodard. It's a human performance, both urban and urbane, the type of grown up we don't see anymore. This is a generation of writers and actors who cut their teeth on Eugene O'Neill and have no compunction about mixing their poetry with their realism. It's almost as if he and Barnabas get into a flowery introspection duel, like a profundity slam, as they talk about blood and the entity responsible for all of it. They share a bizarre duality of loathing and admiration. Woodard marvels at the unnatural progress of the biochemical rite. Barnabas all but confesses to the crimes. Woodard speaks with bizarre admiration. It's the peculiar magnificence of the human spirit that's required to provide the potential for such corruption. Barnabas aids that he must be, at the same time, more than a man and less than a man. Woodard asks if he feels sorry for him, and Barnabas answers that he loathes him very, very deeply. At the Blue Whale, Vicky's take on life is at its most apocalyptically realistic. Woodard visits and rounds out the episode with a strangely aroused disgust at the unholy union going on in Maggie's veins and how her blood hastily accepts the corruption offered. The metamorphoses run rampant, but at the core of it there is a distinct feeling that Woodard is describing naughty sex time, and he can't bring himself to say it's bad. Mind games, sexual metaphors, probably homosexual metaphors. There is a bounty to unpack, all with a sense of inevitable doom for the entire town and maybe all of existence. Barnabas at this time is like a lingering rot eating away at the pretenses of decency, and he is doing so openly compared to what the series has offered thus far. He is somewhere between a Ken Russell movie and a Prince album in his relative frankness, and although he would endure himself with a demand for mothering later on, at this point Jonathan Fritt is playing Barnabas Collins as pure sex in a world where only a Hefner would be such a thing. That openness is one world ending and another world beginning. Woodard admires it a little too much, but he can't take part. Barnabas can, and right now he knows it. This episode hit the airwaves June 2nd, 1967. Episode 251. When Barnabas wakes up to a homicidal stake-wielding Maggie, will he finally When Barnabas wakes up to a homicidal stake-wielding Maggie, will he finally swipe left for dear life? Maggie, Catherine Lee Scott. Barnabas awakens to find Maggie hovering over his coffin, ready to stab him. He stops her and leaves to speak with Vicky, who has a clear love for and perhaps a connection to the past. When he later shows her a lace handkerchief belonging to Josette, she is smitten with its history. This sparks Barnabas' interest. Returning to the old house, he warns Maggie that she will die if she does not embrace her identity as Josette. Then there's that time when the gentle guardian of Sarah and David and Amy threaten to kill his kidnapped victim. Maggie Evans, because she wasn't more easily hypnotized into willingly become the reincarnation of someone she never met. The only French she speaks has the word fries after it. But there she is anyway. For defenders of Barnabas, it's a tough sequence to come back from. It's easy to see why so many have a taste for the ruthless and manipulative Barnabas and feel detached from the vaguely prissy and avuncular hero he later becomes. But as someone who is vaguely prissy and avuncular myself, I would tell them that they have to just deal with it. As long as you know I was sure they'd still like me. Then I'd apologize somehow. Barnabas perhaps spends the rest of the series doing just that. It's one of Jonathan Frid's three characters in the series, along with Good Barnabas and Bramwell. I'd wager it's the easiest. The objectives are a clear and wicked joy to play. But there is an ambiguity here that gives the part a challenging texture. It's clear that if he really wanted to kill Maggie, she'd be dead. Is it her beauty that stops him from doing so? Or is it the fact that he knows while he may have it in him, it would still be wrong? Both Maggie and Barnabas find themselves cast by fate to role plays for which they are profoundly unqualified. Maggie has no interest in Josette. Barnabas is not by nature a violent man, but she looks like Josette, and he's an emotional, ruined, and unwilling vampire, and a completely unintentional way time traveler. He's gone from a world of fishing and finery to curses, betrayal, threats, and suicide. In theory, nothing should matter and life will be easy. If he becomes as bad as the Angeliques, Trask, and Forbes, who stuck him here, they always win. Anyway, and he clearly can't rely on anyone to stake him, unless it's a time inevitable inconvenient for it. He makes a good show for being a big meanie. But he can't seal the deal. We know this because his attempts to do so are as self sabotage as Roy Hinckley's attempts to escape from the island. Because he can't mind control Maggie, setting her free isn't an option, so he may simply have to kill her for his own good. A lifetime sentence for him is no laughing matter. His encounter with Vicky in the episode only complicates things. In Vertigo, the story from which this is clearly based, far more than Dracula. The Barnabas character, played by Jimmy Stewart, never recognizes that his ideal woman is right in front of him. Midge, played by Barbara Del Geddes, Dark Shadows complicates this because Barnabas indeed recognizes that Vicky may not be a winner for Josette, but she gets him. With no coercion, unfortunately, Barnabas, through the embarrassing use of force, has committed to the idea of reviving Josette in Maggie. His ego won't let him easily withdraw from that, and yes, shame on him. And how sad this cheating ignores the fact that his ego, which is simply the comfort he takes in his own judgment, is all he has left. Sacrificing that means sacrificing everything until he has his certainty of hope. This is a lot to ask of anyone. Just because Barnabas is an undead monster doesn't mean he's inhuman. This episode hit the airwaves June 12th, 1967. Episode 271. If it's wedding bells for Liz and Jason, why is the ringing them? Or sorry, if it's wedding bells for Liz and Jason, why is she ringing them with a bloody fireplace poker? Paul Stoddard, Dennis Patrick. Liz explains why she cannot marry Jason in a flashback depicting her attempted assassination of Paul Stoddard. 18 years prior, after using the fireplace set for a rather extreme couples therapy roleplay to respond to his attempts to leave, she seemingly married Paul, whose body was ostensibly buried in a trunk in the basement. Yeah. At this point, I really don't know how most people watch Dark Shadows, or if there even is such a thing as most people. With DVDs largely dead as a medium and streaming packages insisting on separating the pre Barnabas episodes, has a weird but potential telling afterthought. I really can't responsibly begin this essay the way I would have a few years ago. Therefore, I shall. When most people watch Dark Shadows, they begin with the unleashing of Barnabas, and immediately it's clear to anyone that he is not the villain of the series. He may be the television's greatest morality trick. I mean, yes, he's a kidnapper who kills people, but he's no J.R. Ewing. He's doing the former simply because he has to eat. He's doing the latter because he thinks in some way he can release the true inner spirit from some sort of weird working class prison of internally mistaken identity. Well, okay, he also beats the shisha out of Willie Loomis on a regular basis. But everyone has to have a hobby, and considering where he came from, that's simply how you maintain a home appliance. Like knocking a television on the side back when they had sides, or whacking something with batteries in it to do whatever that's supposed to do, teach them manners or something. Realistically, the villain is obviously Jason McGuire. Jason does what he does not just out of greed, but because he legitimately enjoys torturing Liz. Maybe it's class envy. Maybe it's deep seated Irish Catholic rage aimed at someone who is more than likely an atheist or a Protestant, and to Jason, they're probably the same thing. We don't know how much about the alleged death of Paul Stoddard, but we know that Liz has basically made herself serve 18 years with Matthew Morgan's cooking. With no time off for good digestion, it's clear that she feels bad and that she has done more than her share of time served. So we naturally feel sorry for her, and that makes him all the more hateful. What's worse is that Dennis Patrick was quite probably the most charming actor to ever darken the towers of Collinwood. And while he won't be the first thing out of my mouth, if I ever see a cast member again, I suspect most of them would agree with me. So we wind up with that weird animal of the villain you love to hate. And pardon if I digress from my digression, but doesn't that phrase seem a little turned around? Shouldn't you take a certain modicum of satisfaction in having the ethics too? If not love the act of hating a villain, at least have no compunction about hating them. Now that I think about it, the expression that is probably more accurate is the villain you hate to love because you know that you should just like him, but he's such an ingratiating person that honestly I often find myself thinking, well, if I'm going to be married to a hateful parasite, at least he's fun to be around. Liz has been alone for 18 years. She has more money than she knows what to do with. I'm not saying that she should fall head over heels with every extortionist who helps to bury a murdered spouse, but now that I'm thinking about it, I sort of wonder how bad life with Jason would really be. I mean, I'm sure marriage would be terrible, especially because all of my married friends warn me that it's terrible. But I've seen close ups, sorry, of Bill Malloy's beard, and no, I'm not talking about Mrs. Johnson. I'm just saying that she could do worse. I see people get married for money all the time, and I have to give props to Jason for at least being honest about it. And you can't say that Liz doesn't mind slumming it when it comes to husbands. I always detected a class difference between Liz and Paul. There are never any references to the mighty Stoddard, belt loop, empire, or whatever people make their fortunes with. I hear rumors that it has something to do with hard work, but I haven't the nerve to try it. And besides, give Jason a mustache and cut off his supply of Gritchian formula, and you have yourself one Paul Stoddard with a more winning accent. So even with all of that, Jason's moments of sadism and striking enough, or sorry, are striking enough that it overcomes even Dennis Patrick's effervescence, which ironically makes him all the more adept as an actor. As a Dark Shadows viewer, this episode and the ones that immediately followed are some of the first, most reassuring moments for most viewers that the show will deliver. Because at this point, Barnabas has given up on Maggie, probably because he thinks she's dead, but not in the right way. So that entire storyline vaguely feels like it went nowhere. But this one had to go somewhere. It's a bit of te- terrestrial nastiness that has to end in a wedding. The show does such a masterful job at reiterating the source of Liz's anxiety that even if we have not followed it from episode 1, we still feel a profound satisfaction at seeing the flashback to Paul's murder. As a kid, I didn't think they would ever show something like that. And you only get it once, unlike everything else on the show, where the same pivotal moments are often repeated at least 5 times, so that everyone, no matter what day of the week they see it on, gets the thrill. This felt like a genuine reward for paying attention and tuning in every day. It was somehow both the Easter egg and the entire basket. Coming about 1 year and a week after the show went on the air, it had to be even more luxuriously satisfying for viewers who'd been with it from the start. It takes 4 more episodes for the complete denouement. It seems like a typically excessive length until you combine it with the typically excessive buildup. At which point, the 5 episode payoff feels almost generous. Watching the hand of Barnabas rise up and crush Jason's life was a quick and brutally satisfying moment. As well, it's a gesture that becomes a force of nature for Willie. It was a moment that created a new life for Jason. It means something else, but it makes the force within Barnabas seem like something out of the Greek mythology, a cruel and honest crucible responding to an intruder's essence. In some ways, it almost feels as if that force within Barnabas has a judgmental autonomy, completely divorced from the great man, a bit like Competofe's capricious hand would be several years later, because both times it's basically just Barnabas' instinctive response to having someone throw open his bedroom room door without even knocking. And although the coffin was not necessarily rocking, Willie and Jason really should have at least greeted him from his sleep with a newspaper and some toast. This episode hit the airwaves July 10th, 1967. Episode 305. When Sarah takes David on a tour of her home, will there be room for one more in the mausoleum? Sarah Sharon Smith. Barnabas, curious about the weakening side effect of Julia's injections, although she seems delighted. Meanwhile, Sarah shows David a hidden coffin. Curses are blessings on Dark Shadows, and that's not always limited within the series itself. It's also true for how the show was made. Truth time. The soap format slides easily into something that, without love and context, is unwatchable. Slow and dull, but it is not without its advantages. Also, usually the command to stretch it out is a mandate for repetition. But in certain cases, the writers found fascinating eddies of implication to explore, and 305 is an example of why people kept watching. It asks the question we all have in this case about the afterlife and the practices or sorry, practicalities of the paranormal. The episode is vaguely split between Barnabas and Julia and David and Sarah. Both involve a human dealing with a vigorous and supernatural life forms. Unwittingly or not, Barnabas is developing impatience with Julia's conversion process. He's tired of the perpetual hangover intrinsic to being human, and I think he's beginning to suspect that Julia either has no idea what she's doing or is purposefully dragging it out. Barnabas has had remarkable good health for nearly 2 centuries, so we can understand his disappointment. He's reacting as if she's spiking his sherry excuse me, with saltpeter, and for all we know, she might. Julia's savoring his lack of vitality, crossing weird lines between doctor, mother, and lover, promising that she'll take care of Burke Devlin her own way, and conjuring images of Rosa Klibb's clumsy attempt at lesbian seduction in From Russia with Love. It takes a very special lesbian to win Burke Devlin. Meanwhile, outside, David and Sarah discuss their knack for letting David in on secrets, and she tantalizes him with the promise of a whopper. This leads to a marvelously acted dialogue where Smith mixes a very simple honesty with a beautiful textured ambiguity, struggling to explain where she lives in the afterlife. Sarah never claimed to be alive. She just uses the metaphors of living. Here, it's clear that Sarah knows what she is and has as straight as she can be how she lives. She's not going coy, she's not being coy. David is simply not hearing her. I have no idea if the young actors considered the strange weight of the netherworld and her implication, but I would love to know quite simply. Sharon Smith's kick ass for a child actress, understandably entranced by the teleprompter. Smith shows remarkable sophistication in this episode, and the result may be one of Sarah's best, most empowered performances in the series. Dark Shadows is in this era excels at hinting everything. Sorry. Is off stage. There are huge casts of characters we've yet to meet. To hear about the afterlife only heightens our curiosity. Dark Shadows excels not just at horror, but showing us the inner workings and practicalities of the horrific from new perspectives. The David Sarah relationship is one of the most poignant on the program. Each is has lonely and lost as the adults on the show. In that regard, Carolyn, Joe, and Maggie are the sore thumbs on the hand because they seem the least lonely until they aren't. Sarah's overall game may be to curb Barnabas's opportunities for evil or drawn from death's domain by her brother's resurrection. It may simply be to have a friend, the way that Barnabas wants a lover. Vicky will recognize physical resemblances when she goes to the past. Does Sarah see the same thing? By making Sarah the most realistic ghost in horror, the show raises all of the right questions and ones we never knew we had. This episode hit the airwaves on August 25th, 1967. All right, guys, I'm going to stop right there and I'm going to continue tomorrow night for part 7. This has been part 6, chapter 2 of the Dark Shadows Daybook Unbound. I'm still on chapter 2. I'm going to continue tomorrow night. You guys have a great night. I hope you enjoyed this. Sorry if I messed up any words. I think I did some there a bit. But I did correct some of my mess ups. So apologies around. And again, I hope you guys are enjoying this. I'm really loving this book. It's really, really good. Guys, go pick up the Dark Shadows Daybook Unbound. Link to where you can get the Kindle version will be in the description box. So you guys have a great night. Bye bye.